In this video, we will answer the questions: what is sugar? Why is it bad for you, both physically and mentally? And what you can do about it.
Welcome to the Liz and Skatz channel. Hi, I'm Liz. I'm a clinical holistic therapist, yoga and meditation teacher.
And I'm Skatz. I'm a musician and music teacher with type 2 diabetes.
And together we're beating Skatz's type 2 diabetes so that we can stay well and healthy, lose weight, and so we've got much more time to spend together.
And we're doing that with the keto and fasting lifestyle.
Yes.
So help us to help you by doing this. Subscribe, and click on the bell.
We wanted to make sure that we got all the tech out today.
So. We have machines so that we can check. And we've got a slideshow for you, which we have on the computer in front of us.
I know.
So, first point, what is sugar? Well, when people talk about sugar, they might be talking about one of three different things. First of all, they might be talking about the simple carbohydrates. And that's basically, they're talking about table sugar, granulated sugar, the white stuff that you put in your tea and your coffee and you sprinkle on your cereals in the morning.
Now these are very small molecules.
Small chain, they call them.
Small chained carbohydrates, yes.
Mm-hmm. The three that I've seen online anyway: glucose, fructose and galactose.
Yeah.
Never heard of galactose? It sounds very
heard of.
science fiction, doesn't it?
Like it's a galaxy.
Like it's a galaxy, exactly. And then if you combine those into compound sugars, you get either sucrose. Now that is the table sugar that you put in your tea and coffee, and that's a mixture of glucose and fructose. Yeah. Then there's maltose, which is 2 glucose molecules, and you get that from grain.
Yeah.
And then there's lactose, which is actually glucose plus galactose, and that's the only one that you don't get it from plants.
Yeah, because of course lactose comes from milk, and most of the milk in the world tends to come from dairy or cattle, cows.
Although these days you can get soy milk and almond milk and rice milk.
I don't think they have the lactose in.
No, it's not the same definition. So.
Lactose only comes from animal milk.
There you go. So that's the first kind of sugar, simple carbs. The second definition of sugar is it's what complex carbs break down into.
Yes.
So what are the complex carbs?
You hear us talking about complex carbohydrates quite a lot, I would imagine. So we're talking potatoes, rice, pasta, wheat-based cereal products, so oats and barley, and also breads. Yeah. Anything with gluten in, pretty much, you've got a complex carbohydrate chain in there somewhere.
Mm-hmm. And those are the staple parts of our diet, aren't they? The next one, another complex carb, is fruit. Yeah. Which basically contains fibre and fructose, but also pulses. We
have to stipulate that there are different pulses, and there are certain ones that are okay in a small quantity, but the majority of them, kidney beans and peas and things like that, we tend to stay away from.
When we say that, we're talking about the sort of diet that we have.
Yes.
But generally, and the difference is that some have more carbs and some have less carbs.
Yes.
And we'll come to why we eat more or less of them later.
Yes.
And there's nuts.
Nuts.
I love them. It's the same with pulses, isn't it? Because some of them are high in carbs and some of them are a little bit lower in carbs.
That's it, yeah. We're going to do a video hopefully on, we definitely want to do one on nuts, don't we? Because there's very differing carb contents between different types of nuts. There are certain nuts that are fantastic, and there are other bits of information in there that we need to talk to you about too, like omega-3s.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. And the next one, vegetables. Did you know that vegetables were carbs, for a start?
Yep.
And of course there are different kinds of vegetables which have much, much differing levels of sugars in them.
Yeah.
And
some of them are almost starch, aren't they?
Yeah.
Like potatoes.
The starchy ones. Starch is a form of carbohydrate.
Yeah.
Anything that grows below the ground.
Indeed.
Is much more starchy. The ones that grow above the ground, the greener ones in general, there's a lot more fibre in them, and but they're still carbs. They still have sugars in them, so you have to measure them if you're on a low carb diet like we are.
Yeah.
Great. And the third kind of sugar that you'll hear about is when the doctor says blood. Yes, when the doctor says, "Oh, your blood sugar's very high," well, he's not talking about sugar. Well, he is talking about sugar, but it's glucose, and that's what all of these foods break down into. Even fructose breaks down into glucose
eventually.
So yeah, that's the end product of all of this.
So this is what's swimming around in our blood all the time, and
if you have type 2 diabetes like me, there's too much of it and it stays there for too long because of things that we will mention later on.
Yes.
There we go. So what's the problem then?
What's the problem?
What's the problem? Why is it bad for you?
Oh,
well,
many
we've
things,
got a huge list here.
Yeah, and we could probably talk about this for about 3 or 4 hours.
We could actually. We were talking about it earlier as we looked through all of these different things. We've got to make sure we don't.
So much. I know we need to stop. So stop us if we're waffling.
Yeah.
So to start off with, we've got on the screen for you now the standard food pyramid that's issued by.
This is the Irish.
Is it the HSE? In
Yes.
Ireland.
Yeah.
So the Health Service Executive in Ireland. But this is pretty much the way it goes for most of the Western world, really.
Mm-hmm.
And at the bottom, you can see the green area, which is just go for it, according to the HSE. And as you move up and up and up this little pyramid, the ones at the top are the things that you should eat the less and more less.
The least of.
Thank you.
So it gets more and more dangerous as you go up,
Yes.
and smaller and smaller portions. It says down the right-hand side, as you can see there.
Yeah. So the pointy bit's the scary bit.
The pointy bit is very scary. Yeah. Well, actually, I mean,
there's 3 pointy bits, but
I'm just looking at it closely. The part of the pointy bit at the top is sugar, cakes, biscuits, sugary drinks.
So as you'll see, the first one, the green area, has actually got, as we mentioned earlier, quite a few carbs in, because a lot of the vegetables that grow underground have quite a significant amount of carbohydrates in, like potatoes, carrots, parsnips, all the beets and swedes, things like that. Fruit juices there as well, so that's got quite a lot of carbohydrates in. The next one up is all of the complex carbs. So they're actually encouraging you to eat, the majority of your food should be those bottom 2, which is mainly carbohydrates.
And if you have a look at this as a whole, the bottom 3 are basically all carbs.
Yeah.
And some of the next layer as well, because there's still carbs. The beans and nuts are in the 4th layer.
Yeah, and some of the nuts and the beans there do contain quite a lot of carbohydrates.
Yeah. So it's only fats, spreads and oils that don't have any carbs in at all, except for actually in spreads.
Yeah.
There's probably some carbs in there. They've got all kinds of things added.
And if you're eating fat-free, we'll talk about this later on, low fat or fat-free products, they all contain sugars. So this is something else to watch out for. There
you go. So in conclusion, the food pyramid is really heavily weighted towards carbs, and even the things that they don't say are carbs. It doesn't mention carbs on there, but
no.
This is why we're trying to answer the question, what is sugar? Because it's all there on the food pyramid, the whole thing.
In the majority.
So you go into your supermarket, and 80% of what's in there
has some form of carbohydrate in it. Yes. I watched a video the other day, and it said, that there's only about 2 aisles in the supermarket which are just natural whole foods that haven't been tampered with, and that's the food aisle and the fat aisle.
Yeah.
And of course, there's most of the bottled fats are tampered with as well.
Yeah. So, and even in the fat aisle, there's milk.
And that's another video altogether.
Yeah. So too many carbs, basically in everywhere. Then there's the staple carbs, and they're called the staple carbs because we tend to have them in every single meal that we have. Every single meal. Yeah. And you don't expect to have, there's the old saying, meat and 2 veg. So you don't expect to have meat and 2 veg without potatoes.
Yeah.
You don't expect to have an Italian meal without pasta.
Yeah.
You don't expect
or bread.
Or bread. Yeah. You get given bread when you go into a restaurant.
Yes. It's the first thing you get. Bring out
have
here.
Some carbs.
Have some bread, yeah.
And there's a culture of eating potatoes.
Yeah.
Especially in Ireland, but in the UK it's chips. And in restaurants over here, I mean, we've been for meals where we've had meat served on a bed of mashed potatoes.
Yeah.
And then you're served vegetables with mashed potatoes
Yeah.
and boiled potatoes, and they'll offer
As
you
well.
chips as well.
Yes.
So there's 4 kinds of potatoes
And
going
bring
on.
the bread out.
And bring bread to dip up any
to mop
potato
out the
you've
sauce.
left on
Yeah,
the
yeah.
potato. And you'll
Fries
see
with
it
everything in the US as well.
culturally. When we treat each other, Grandad's coming round, he'll have some sweets for you. At Christmas, selection boxes,
Yeah.
sweets,
Cakes.
biscuits, cakes, chocolates.
Yeah, puddings.
It's all
Yeah.
it's part of the psyche, the Western
Yeah.
cultural.
But not only that, it's also considered poor form if you don't have a birthday cake on your birthday, or a cake for a celebration, or a cake at a wedding.
Yeah. You're going around to your auntie's house.
Yeah.
Have
So I mean, for
cup of tea and a slice of cake.
for all kind of milestone celebrations, there's always a cake. There's always sweet treats. There's always it's part of what we do.
And desserts, we've just
Yeah.
put as the next part. It's only really in recent times, I mean, in terms of hundreds of years,
Yeah.
that normal people, the average person, has been eating dessert.
Yeah. And of
Yeah.
course, during the war years, sugar would have been rationed, and so having a cake, you'd have saved up all of your sugar to make a cake for something, or a dessert for something special. So of course it's only really after that, so once again 50s, 60s, 70s onwards, that we've had regular access to sweet treats and desserts.
So how much do we need? What's the amount that governments recommend that we have in terms of sugar?
As far as carbohydrates are concerned, which of course, as we've just talked about, all of them break down into sugars of some description. Carbohydrates on a whole, 65% of your calorific intake each day should be carbs, according to the internet and all of these
The
little
government bodies
and what have you. This is what we've just done, checked it all out.
That is an awful lot.
Yeah.
That's why the food pyramid is weighted like that.
Yeah.
So that's the first reason why it's bad for you. Second reason is the food industry adds loads and loads of sugar, and it's processed and refined, and it's not necessarily called sugars. It might be called corn starch or corn syrup.
Corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup is something that the Americans are really fighting against at the moment. It seems to be in absolutely everything, from what my American colleagues are saying to me on keto websites and things like that. It's in absolutely everything, including bread sometimes as well. And it is it's poisonous. It's really, really dangerous for you.
And it's huge industry.
Yeah.
Massive industry, and that's why the supermarkets are absolutely crammed full.
Yeah.
The central aisles of supermarkets, it's all stuff in packets, and it's virtually all got added, processed, refined stuff in it.
Some sort of sugars in it.
Something that gets me right in the gut. The whole sugar industry is founded on slavery.
Yeah. Something that we really are not, doesn't sit comfortable with us at all.
No.
Even to this day, you can look up online and see that most of the raw cane sugars and beet sugars are harvested by people who are way too young to be doing that sort of work, and who get very, very little money in return for their hard labour. And it is a very, very hard life. Advertising. This is it's a form of, subliminal and psychological stuff that they do on the telly all the time. It's now advertising, things that will lead you to buy products that contain lots of sugars.
For example,
lots of carbohydrates.
If you've seen the Weetabix advert,
Yeah.
where there's a little girl and she's fishing and she's hooked a submarine and
Yeah.
it's pulled completely out of the water because she's eaten her Weetabix.
Yeah.
And that's giving you the impression that it gives you superpowers, or that it's makes you super strong.
Yeah, gives you lots of energy. Back in our day, there used to be the Ready Brek adverts, for those of you who remember those, with the big energy
glow.
round, the thing you glow after you've had your Ready Brek in the morning, meaning that you can keep yourself warm. So,
and you could go to school in a t-shirt in the snow and you'd be fine because you'd eaten your Ready Brek.
Also,
and nobody can eat 3 Weetabix. I'm just enhancing their reputation,
indeed,
aren't
yes,
they? But that's the sort of things that they say.
And of course, there is always an element of comedy attached, which also endears you to a product. They either tug at the heartstrings or make you laugh. One of the two things. And of course, the little girl pulling the submarine out of the sea it's amusing, isn't it? It's never going to happen, but it's amusing. Or they'll just be bright and poppy or colourful for children to be attracted to. So it's a huge thing.
And then, of course, with these added sugars, this is something that started happening 50 or 60 years ago, I think, when the government decided it's fat that is the problem.
Yeah.
They saw that people were fat and they said fat's the problem. And actually, they should have been focusing on the sugar.
Yes. So now we have a myriad of low-fat or zero-fat products on the market. Now, the things where they've taken out the low, where they're saying that they're low-fat, like sort of spreads and yogurt, things like that, then 9 times out of 10, because the fat has the taste, instead they put in lots of sugars. I invite you to walk around your supermarket like I do, which is like this, looking at things.
Because it's written in such small writing.
Teeny tiny writing. I invite you to go and look at low-fat yogurts, low-fat drinks and low-fat sort of milky things, spreads, and see how much carbohydrate, of which are sugars, is in there. And it will be very startling to you, the amount that's in there. So, of course, what you're actually eating is low-fat, but it's full of sugar.
Now, the number of meals a day that we eat, this is another thing. This is another reason why these sugars are bad for you.
Now, I've heard people on these various forums and groups on Facebook who are living in the States who say that they will eat, not meals, but they will actually sit down and eat something around about 6 times a day. So that means breakfast and then a snack and then lunch and then a snack and then something else and then the main meal in the evening and then something snacky in the evening and then maybe something before they go to bed. I had a woman talking to me only the other day about how she can't sleep unless she's had something to eat before she goes to bed. That's serious stuff.
It's stunning, isn't it? But it's very, very common.
So one of the things that we need to do is actually shorten our eating windows and only eat a few times a day, not many times a day.
So, number of meals per day
Yeah.
is through the roof.
Indeed.
So, another reason it's bad for you is that we now have a much more sedentary lifestyle than we used to decades, long time ago.
When we were kids, we were saying, that we were out and about all day, running around, climbing trees, fishing newts out of ponds and things like that. That's what I was doing when I was a kid.
That was the culture. We were allowed to go out down the park and we'd be able to be out on the streets without the fears that are instilled in children nowadays because of the various dangers that there are out there.
And now, of course, COVID.
And now COVID as well, which has just made it even worse. And also there's TV, there's computers, that's stopping children from going out because there's such a lot of fun on there, there's such a lot of choice, so many games you can play on the computer, and there's education on the computer as well. So
it's a huge amount of distraction.
And that's just for children.
Yeah.
Adults as well, there's more and more adults working in offices and sitting down to do their work than there were hundreds of years ago. I mean, it was all... We all used to be farmers out in the countryside, and I think it was 2008 when the world changed from having more people working in the countryside than there are in the cities. We've just changed that round.
The other way around.
Yeah. So
very interesting.
And because we're not all athletes, it's only athletes that need lots and lots and lots of energy from carbohydrates. And also obesity, which is prevalent these days, that only encourages less activity because you don't feel like going for a walk or going for a run. You can't move as fast or as far.
You might have more aches and pains.
And so more and more obese people do more and more sedentary things. Another reason why sugar is a problem is drinks. There's a social culture, certainly in Western society and probably around the world as well, of celebrating using drinks. I mean, mainly alcoholic drinks, but and more these days the alcoholic drinks are alco pops, which are filled with sugar.
Cocktails.
And then there's cocktails and mixers. And
beer.
Cider,
lots
lager.
and lots of carbs in beer.
Part of the social norm to do that, and on celebrations, it's you pop the bubbly, you have a drink, you toast. It's all about the drinks that are full of sugar.
That's right.
And there's also drinks that purport to be fruit juices that actually are fruit juice drinks. So they've not only is there fructose in the juice from the fruit, there's added sugar that you get to make it even more sweet, because we're getting used to more and more and more sweet things.
Indeed.
Then there's fizzy drinks, or soda as you call them in the States.
Yeah.
They're all ram-packed with sugar, or they've got artificial sweeteners in it, which is another thing.
It can be just as bad, unfortunately. Yeah.
And then of course there's the tea and the coffee and drinking chocolate, the hot drinks, that there can be added sugar to, depending on what your taste is, but some people put 6 spoonfuls of sugar in their tea, and that's
or sweeteners again.
Or sweeteners.
Yeah.
Then there's the what I've called the energy drinks down on here, but what I mean by that is the caffeine drinks.
Yes.
Which are absolutely crammed full of sugar as well.
Yeah, and of course way too much caffeine as well.
Yeah, we'll go into that another.
Not good.
I'm going to have a rant on a video about caffeine one of these days, because I have virtually no caffeine whatsoever. There's a good reason for that. I just can't get like this. It's no good. Even if I have a tiny bit now, you'd notice it if you've ever tried to give up caffeine. That the hangover, or whatever you call it, the come down, is absolutely awful, and that's a very good sign that it's a dangerous drug.
Yeah, and not good for you.
Yeah. So, which leads us very nicely on to the next slide, which is sugar's addictive. Take over.
So,
I'll just sit back and drink.
Sugars are addictive. What happens when we ingest any kind of carbohydrate or sugar, whether it be glucose, fructose, any of the ones we've mentioned beforehand, is that immediately as it comes into contact with our tongue, we have taste receptors in our tongues. The message goes up to the brain and it stimulates a reward system which releases dopamine. Now, the thing is with dopamine is that it's fantastic and it makes you want to do it again and again and again. So we become more and more reliant on that feeling, and we kind of like it, and it becomes cozy and comforting. With other foods that aren't carbohydrates, the dopamine level when we eat it slowly drops. And so if we're eating the same thing over and over again, it prompts us to eat something different so that we actually get a good variety in our diets. Now, what happens with carbohydrates though is that the dopamine level stays at the same as all the time. So it doesn't matter, it never drops off. So we will continue to want carbohydrates all the time. This is why we end up with cravings for carbohydrates, and we can end up in a kind of an addictive cycle. Now, dopamine is fantastic, quite frankly, because it does make you feel warm, fuzzy and gorgeous.
There's a good reason for it. Our bodies do that for very good reasons.
Yes, and it means, yes, let's eat more of that. However, with carbohydrates, it's too much. It's too much and too many. So dopamine, when we eat carbohydrates, is a very similar reaction to when we ingest alcohol or any kind of illegal drug, and nicotine as well. So all of these are lumped in the same reward system, and carbohydrates is in there as well. So the problem is that over a period of time, it becomes normal for us to eat that food, and if we don't, we crave it, and so therefore it is an addiction. And it's also psychological as well. I've just done a video recently about how I realised that I do have a carb addiction, because now that it's not there in large quantities and in the complex carbohydrate quantities at all, because I can't remember the last time I ate bread or potato or anything along those lines, or had any sugar. Yes, probably March. So other than vegetables and a few tiny bits of fruit that we don't have any complex carbohydrates. So if I ate them now, it would probably just kick me right back into addiction again, and I can't do that. We can't do that. So it is a very, very scary situation that we're eating, and we're told to eat addictive foods by nearly all the medical people.
And by the advertisers as well, and they make it exciting for us to ingest all of this.
Absolutely.
Well, it's all addictive.
Yes.
And whether you knew it or accepted it or not, it is the case.
Yeah.
And knowing that and admitting it is the first step in actually doing something about it.
That's right. And actually the majority of the time when you go into any kind of, I work in rehab centres and people with addiction issues, the majority of the time it's complete abstinence is required in order for us to be able to get over our addiction.
And you can't completely abstain from carbs because there are lots of things that have got carbs in them that are mainly protein that you need.
Yeah.
Lots of things that are the good fats.
But for
carbs.
example, broccoli, which has complex carbohydrates in it, releases no dopamine into your brain whatsoever.
There you go. So you can't get addicted to broccoli.
No.
Which is why kids don't like it so much.
Yeah, exactly right.
There you go. So, next reason why it's bad for you. We told you there were so many of these. And thank you for hanging on this far into the video. There will be all of the information you need soon towards the end of the video. That is going to be about what you can do about it.
Yeah.
But this is the big one, insulin resistance.
Insulin is released when we eat complex carbohydrates of any description and proteins as well. And it's released into the bloodstream in order to scoop up all of the blood sugar as it's been as it's turned into glucose, and then ingest it into each of our cells in our body. So that's what insulin basically does. The other function of insulin is it is a fat storing hormone.
And how do we become resistant?
When we eat far too many carbohydrates or complex carbohydrates like the breads.
The simple sugars as well.
Yeah, the simple sugars. So all of those that we've mentioned, the aforementioned carbohydrates, we then have too much sugar in the blood, too much glucose in the blood, I should say. And therefore more and more and more insulin is pumped out. When we eat 3 or 4 times in a day, every single time we eat something, as long as it's got the carbs or the sugars in, we will release insulin. So if you can imagine 4 or 5 times a day, out comes the insulin. It's too much. And so eventually what happens is that we go into insulin resistance. This is where the cells go, I've got too much glucose in my cells, there's too much insulin floating about, I don't like it, I'm not accepting any more glucose from insulin, thank you, and shuts down.
Yeah.
Then we've got lots of glucose in the blood, and then more insulin gets released into the blood. With this going on and on and on, the blood sugar just can't be released, and so what happens is the insulin stores all the glucose this area first, and then everywhere else. So we put on weight, we store fat.
And then eventually what happens is the pancreas can't produce enough insulin to cope with the increased glucose that you've got, but your glucose is still, if you had a blood test at that point, your glucose is still looking fairly low. It's not telling you that you're diabetic, and so the doctors who don't test for insulin, certainly not in the UK and Ireland, they wouldn't be saying, oh, you're in danger. But actually that's the point when you're pre-diabetic, when you should be doing something about it. Your insulin's way up here and your glucose is still there because you're fighting and fighting and fighting this to keep this level of glucose down, and then eventually it can't fight any longer and the glucose goes up, and that's that point when the doctor says, there's a danger. But actually
it's too late.
Early testing would point that out, that your insulin is way too high from much earlier. And you know, there are children now who are pre-diabetic
and who are insulin resistant. So one of the first ways that you can actually find out a pretty good symptom that you are insulin resistant is that you start putting weight on around your middle. This is the visceral fat. So that is a really good sign. And if you're starting to put on weight, then that is probably where it's going to go on first, because it will go surround your organs first, which is the first line of attack that the insulin will go and store. It'll store it around that area.
And what does it lead to? We've already said.
Leads to, unfortunately, type 2 diabetes, which is where Skatz is at this point in time, because we haven't had a test to see if you still are.
No, in less than a month I'm having my blood tests.
It's the 22nd of September, I think.
Yeah, so it'll be the end of September before I get them, or even the start of October.
It'll be the start of October, and then we'll know your A1C numbers, which is the blood sugar levels. However, we would like, if it's possible, to be able to do the insulin if we can. It might be. I think it'd be worth paying for that.
I'm going to ask when I have my blood test to see whether they can test for insulin.
Yeah,
And
because
if I have to pay for it, then
we'll do it.
We'll do it.
Yeah, because I think it's really important. So, of course, diabetes, then you end up with all sorts of issues. You have to get your eyes tested regularly. You have to, small blood vessels get damaged with too much blood sugar.
Yeah.
So, you can end up with eyesight and end up with things like amputations and, heart disease and things like that. It's really, really scary. Higher risk of stroke. Yeah.
Yeah, all kinds of disease. Higher cancer risks for certain cancers especially.
Yeah.
There we go. So, what's the cure? What do we need to do about this? What can we do
Robert
about
Smith
sugar?
is the cure. No.
Robert Smith. He's one of the cure.
He's one of the cure, yes.
Yeah.
So, sugar or glucose in the body as a fuel is pretty good, but it doesn't last very long. It's a bit like burning kindling or very thin sticks. So it'll burn nice and bright and warm for a short time, but then poof, it's gone. Then we need some more.
Yeah, we crave some more.
Indeed. And this is obviously where the cravings come in too. But fat does burn much more efficiently and for longer. It's kind of a long, slow burn. So you can get much more done. So when you eat more fat, you're more likely to be able to keep going all day. Now, you've probably noticed that athletes don't really eat cake. Yeah. So we want to try and be as healthy as possible in our outlook in life. And so we look to the people who are the most fit and healthy on the planet. And the last time I saw anybody running a marathon with a cake was a long, long time ago, I think. So
yeah, they used to smoke cigarettes.
I know,
yeah. That's how long ago.
That was, having a fag in half time, wasn't it?
Yeah, on the football. Yeah,
yeah, brilliant.
And so, yeah. So ultimately, the answer to this question is ketosis, going keto diet, very low carb diet, and intermittent fasting because they go hand in hand.
Yes.
Ultimately, that means you eat fewer meals a day, you eat lower amounts of foods, and you definitely have a food pyramid which is completely different from that food pyramid. Maybe we should design
the opposite way around.
I think there may be
a keto pyramid.
Food pyramid.
We need a keto pyramid. If you want to know a little bit more about keto diet and how we've incorporated it into our lives, then click on some of the little cards that are coming up in the corners.
Yes, it's in that corner.
There we go.
It's a difficult thing, obviously. We're overcoming years and years and years. Your whole life, you've been conditioned to eat a high carb diet.
Yeah, 3 meals a day as well.
And so that's one of the reasons why people question the keto diet, because they think it's dangerous if you're going to do this for the rest of your life, or even for more than a few weeks. They say, "Isn't you sure it's not dangerous? And isn't fasting, isn't that dangerous as well?" Well, no. And they say, no, the research hasn't been done. Well, the research in terms of government research hasn't been done, and it's very difficult to do it under those rules and regulations because what they do is they require test groups, they require long-term testing, and it's very difficult to put people in a lab for all of their lives and just illegal. Have them eaten. It's illegal, yes, and get them to eat certain kinds of foods and do certain kinds of activities, because people won't always tell you if you're out in the wild like we are,
and they won't adhere to what the government guidelines are all the time, so it's very, very difficult.
But there are organisations who are doing lots of testing, and that's been going on for years. I mean, since before the Atkins diet, which became a fad, unfortunately, but they had the right idea of low carbs. Since then, there have been a lot of organisations and doctors working on how to improve what we do with the keto diet, and it's getting very healthy now.
Actually, ketosis and the ketogenic diet was invented to prevent children having epilepsy, severe epilepsy, because it just reduced all of the inflammation in the diet, and it does actually help, and it's still being prescribed today for children with epilepsy. Yeah.
So be careful of that conditioning.
Indeed.
And it can be changed.
Yeah.
So what can we do about it? Another thing we can do about it is exercise and relaxation.
Yeah, exercise. Now, when we talk about exercise, to start off with, if you're doing the ketogenic diet, to start off with, what you need to be doing is nice, gentle, steady exercise. So easy walking, gentle swimming, and maybe some very sort of like, gentle cycling, something like that. Very good. Yoga, meditation.
Because that burns the most amount of fat.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the least amount of glucose.
Indeed.
Which is what you want to aim for if you want to lose the weight.
Yeah. So as far as relaxation is concerned, we should be doing meditating and mindfulness, things like that. Very, very useful just to keep the cortisol levels down, because cortisol also can actually make the old pancreas spring into action once again and release the insulin.
And it stops weight loss.
Yeah, so just reducing your stress is a good plan.
There you go. Now finally, big changes that really need to happen to Western culture are, well, the medicine for a start. Medicine is basically looking for a cure for things, and they see a disease and they try and cure it, and they look very narrowly at diseases, and they say we want to cure that particular thing.
Cure the symptom.
So they cure the symptom. But instead, wouldn't it be better if we were looking at the root cause? We go back a lot further and find out what's happening with the lifestyle and with the nutrition of a person that has created this situation where they've developed the disease. So the disease only happens this far along.
Yeah.
It's all about what happens here. And if we can take you back to what happens here and make this better, then the diseases have less of a chance of appearing and developing and getting bad. And this is where obesity sits. Obesity is the disease, and we can cure obesity.
And the gap actually between here and here is becoming a lot shorter, unfortunately. We're seeing children who are already insulin resistant and who are already into obesity status, which is very, very scary.
Yeah.
So of course they're going to be contracting debilitating symptoms from their obesity, from their diet, much, much sooner and much, much younger.
That's true.
It won't be into your 30s and 40s, and into the 30s, 40s and 50s that you're getting these illnesses. It'll be 20s and 30s. So something needs to change very quickly. Yeah.
And it's the situation now is you wait too late and then medicate.
Yeah.
And that rhymes nicely, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And there's also a problem, and this is a political problem really, and that it's the lobbying of the big industries. The sugar industry is huge, and they have made sure over the last 50 or 60 years that sugar, it hasn't been seen as a bad thing, and that fat has been seen as the evil. And that culture needs to change.
Yeah.
And I think it's awful that politicians have to be swayed by the people who give them their money for their campaigns.
Yeah.
So sugar industry and of course big pharma. There's a lot of talk about big pharma, and I don't agree with all of it. I don't agree that they are intrinsically nasty people, but their focus is on making money for their shareholders.
They're a business.
It's a money-based business, and that does actually lead to a situation where they can give money to governments to pressurise them into making sure that certain drugs and certain chemicals and certain ways of looking at nutrition are kept the way they want it, so that they can carry on selling what they sell. That's not a good situation, because that puts undue pressure on
the medical profession. So then there's advertising. Advertising is a big thing. We need to, I think finally we've got junk food adverts are only on after 9 o'clock in the evening. Alcohol is only on after 9 o'clock in the evening. So we're getting a watershed for junk and alcohol. So that's a good thing. However, there's still a lot of food that's being advertised before 9 o'clock that children can see, and it gets stuck into your psyche. I can still remember advertising jingles from when I was a child. This is how ingrained it is in our brains, so we have to do something about that too. Yeah, so supermarkets as well, they're a big thing. Most of the supermarkets, sort of 80% of the supermarket is processed food these days. The only things that pretty much that you can buy that are whole and natural are the meat aisle and the vegetable aisle. That's about it.
Mm-hmm. And another problem is that change is very slow.
Yeah.
It takes a long time to get things through government and make these changes. There was an article only a few days ago that's saying that obesity, yes, it's a disease, but the problem isn't lifestyle, the problem is mostly genetics. And that just puts the focus away from what people need to do for themselves. And it is possible, I think, and this is based on studies that were only focused on one particular thing. And I think that's a dangerous way of doing studying. It's the opposite of holistic. And that is basically it. And the conclusion is, sugar is bad for you. Yeah.
If you're interested in pursuing a keto and intermittent fasting lifestyle, then comment below and we can link you in with various different loveliness around the screen, and also in the description below and in the comment below to various different videos that we've made, and also some of the scientific evidence is going to be in the description as well.
Yeah, and have a chat with us in the comments.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you and hear your ideas and how you plan to make this your lifestyle too. And
thank you for watching to the very, 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 very end of this quite long video. I think it's the longest one yet. So if you've hung around till the end, then thank you so much.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
You're doing a lot of good, because the longer you watch, then the quicker we are going to get to the top of the search list on YouTube, and the more people will be able to watch it and benefit from it. So thank you.
Wonderful. And just before we go, once again, if you can subscribe and click on the bell, give us the like as well, because that all helps us to be able to help you. So, and we will see you in the next video. Bye-bye. Bye.